It started with a playground dispute between children, a simple argument over a swing that should have ended with apologies and handshakes. But when Officer Vincent Crawford arrived at Lincoln Elementary, he saw something different. He saw a threat that needed to be neutralized. Within minutes, a respected mother and teacher lay unconscious on the asphalt, her ribs cracked, her dignity shattered. What Officer Crawford didn't know was that the woman he had just brutalized was married to one of the most powerful men in the United States Navy. And when Admiral Robert Kane received that phone call from a hospital bed, he would unleash a reckoning that would end careers, expose corruption, and remind an entire city that power without accountability is tyranny in uniform.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
The autumn sun filtered through the tall windows of Roosevelt Elementary School in Fairhaven, Connecticut, casting golden rectangles across the polished linoleum floors. In classroom 4B, Miss Victoria Kane moved between rows of small desks with the practiced grace of someone who had spent 15 years nurturing young minds. Her voice was warm but firm as she guided her fourth-grade students through their afternoon math lesson. At 36, Victoria carried herself with the quiet confidence that came from knowing her purpose. Her natural hair was styled in neat locks that she often adorned with colorful scarves, and her dark eyes held the kind of patience that made even the most restless 9-year-old feel heard and valued. Today, she wore a burgundy cardigan over a simple dress, comfortable shoes that could handle playground duty, and the small gold wedding band that reminded her daily of the man she loved, who was currently stationed 7,000 miles away. Victoria had been teaching at Roosevelt Elementary since graduating from Teachers College at Columbia University. She had chosen this school deliberately, drawn to its diverse student body and its mission of serving children from all backgrounds. The hallways buzzed with conversations in English, Spanish, and Mandarin. The walls displayed artwork celebrating Black History Month, Dia de los Muertos, and Lunar New Year with equal prominence. It was exactly the kind of environment Victoria believed could shape the next generation into something better than the one that had come before. What her colleagues and students didn't know was that Victoria's husband held one of the most critical positions in the United States military. Admiral Robert Kane commanded the Pacific Fleet's submarine force, overseeing nuclear submarines that patrolled the waters from California to Japan. His decisions affected global naval strategy and national security at the highest levels. But Victoria had never mentioned his rank to anyone at school. To her students and fellow teachers, she was simply Mrs. Kane, the patient educator who stayed late to help struggling readers and organized weekend science fairs that made learning feel like magic. The Kane family had moved to Fairhaven 3 years ago when Robert's previous assignment ended and they decided they wanted stability for their daughter Emma while he completed his final tours before retirement. They had chosen a modest colonial house in a neighborhood where Emma could walk to school and Victoria could bike to work. Nothing about their lifestyle suggested the level of responsibility Robert carried or the security clearance that governed much of his daily life. As the afternoon wound down, Victoria helped her students pack their backpacks and line up for dismissal. Emma Kane, all 8 years old, with her mother's thoughtful eyes and her father's stubborn chin, bounced impatiently in the line. "Mom," Emma whispered, "can I play on the playground for a few minutes before we go home?" Victoria glanced at the clock. She had lesson plans to finish and papers to grade, but the October weather was perfect and Emma had been cooped up inside all day. 15 minutes, Victoria said with a smile. Then we need to head home so you can start your homework before dinner. The playground at Roosevelt Elementary was a testament to community involvement. Parents had fundraised for new equipment just 2 years earlier, and the result was a wonderland of climbing structures, slides, and swings that accommodated children of all abilities. The rubber mulch was clean, the equipment well-maintained, and the space was designed to encourage both individual play and group cooperation. Victoria settled onto a bench near the swing set, pulling out her tablet to review the next day's lesson plan while keeping one eye on Emma. Her daughter had immediately gravitated toward the monkey bars, determined to master the crossing that had eluded her all summer. Other children scattered across the playground, their voices creating the happy chaos that Victoria associated with childhood at its best. Among the children were siblings Jason and Maria Reeves, whose mother worked double shifts at the local hospital. 9-year-old Aiden Cooper, whose grandmother picked him up most days because both his parents worked downtown. And Lily Zhang, whose parents owned the Chinese restaurant where Victoria occasionally ordered takeout when Robert was deployed and cooking felt like too much effort. The children played with the unconscious integration that adults often struggled to achieve. Race, language, family income, none of it mattered when there were slides to conquer and games to invent. Victoria watched them with the satisfaction of someone who believed deeply in the possibility of human goodness. But even in this peaceful setting, Victoria remained alert to the dynamics of childhood interaction. Teaching had taught her to recognize the early signs of conflict, the moments when play could turn into tears or frustration. She noticed when voices grew louder, when body language shifted from playful to tense. It was this awareness that made her look up from her lesson plans when she heard Emma's voice rise above the general playground chatter. "That's not fair," Emma was saying, her small fists planted on her hips, in a gesture Victoria recognized as pure determination. "You can't just take the swing when someone else was waiting." The object of Emma's indignation was Tyler Morrison, a fifth grader who was known for pushing boundaries with both students and teachers. He had claimed the last available swing just as Emma was walking toward it, and his smirk suggested he was enjoying the confrontation. "I got here first," Tyler said, with the casual cruelty that came easily to children who had learned its size often determined who won disagreements. Victoria stood up from the bench, preparing to intervene before the situation escalated. But before she could take a step, another voice joined the conversation. "Tyler, that's not true and you know it." The speaker was Aiden Cooper, his voice steady despite being 2 years younger than Tyler. "Emma was walking to the swing. You ran in front of her to get there first." Victoria felt a surge of pride at Aiden's willingness to stand up for fairness, but she also recognized the potential for the situation to spiral. Tyler was bigger than both Emma and Aiden, and he had a reputation for not backing down when challenged. She was about to step in when Tyler's response surprised everyone. "Fine," he said, hopping off the swing with exaggerated annoyance, "but I'm telling my mom that you guys were being mean to me."
It was a typical childhood threat, the kind of thing that usually dissolved into nothing within minutes. Emma thanked Aiden, took her turn on the swing, and Victoria returned to her lesson plans, thinking the matter was settled. What none of them knew was that Tyler's mother, Linda Morrison, was already having a difficult day. Her divorce proceedings were not going well. Her ex-husband was behind on child support, and her supervisor at the insurance company where she worked had criticized her performance that morning. When Tyler called her from the school's office 15 minutes later, claiming that some kids had bullied him and stolen his swing, Linda's frustration found a target. Within 20 minutes, Linda Morrison was in her car, driving toward Roosevelt Elementary with a head full of anger and a determination to make someone pay for her son's wounded feelings. She had already decided that the school wasn't doing enough to protect children like Tyler, and she was prepared to make that point forcefully. Victoria was helping Emma with her backpack when she noticed a woman storming across the playground, her face flushed with anger and her eyes scanning the area like a predator seeking prey. Victoria's teacher instincts immediately went on alert. This was the kind of confrontation that could turn ugly quickly, especially if the approaching parent had already decided that someone needed to be blamed. The woman, who Victoria would later learn was Linda Morrison, spotted Tyler near the basketball court and called out to him. "Tyler, get over here right now. Show me which kids were bullying you." Victoria felt her stomach tighten. She could see where this was heading, and every instinct told her to gather Emma and leave immediately. But as Tyler pointed in their direction, Victoria realized that leaving might not be an option. The confrontation that would change everything was walking straight toward them, and there was nowhere to run. Emma tugged on her mother's sleeve, sensing the tension in the air even if she didn't understand its source. "Mom, what's wrong?" Victoria put a protective arm around her daughter's shoulders and prepared to face whatever was coming. She had dealt with upset parents before, had navigated difficult conversations about grades and behavior and school policies. She could handle this.
What Victoria couldn't know was that this confrontation would be unlike anything she had experienced in her 15 years of teaching. Within the hour, she would be fighting for consciousness on a hospital stretcher, while her husband received a phone call that would set in motion a reckoning powerful enough to shake the foundations of law enforcement in Fairhaven County. The peaceful afternoon at Roosevelt Elementary was about to explode into something that would test everything Victoria believed about justice, community, and the price of standing up for what was right. Linda Morrison stormed across Roosevelt Elementary's playground with the fury of someone who had been looking for a fight all day. Her blonde hair whipped around her face as she marched toward Victoria and Emma, Tyler trailing behind her with the satisfied expression of a child who knew he had successfully summoned adult reinforcement. Victoria maintained her position near the swing set, one protective hand resting on Emma's shoulder. Her years of teaching had prepared her for difficult parent encounters, but something about Linda's aggressive approach set off alarm bells. This wasn't the controlled frustration of a concerned parent seeking answers. This was raw hostility, looking for a target.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
You, Linda snapped, pointing an accusatory finger at Victoria. Are you the mother of the kid who was bullying my son? Victoria kept her voice calm and professional. I'm Victoria Kane, Emma's mother. I understand there was some disagreement about the swing, but the children worked it out themselves. No one was bullying anyone. Linda's eyes narrowed as she took in Victoria's appearance, her gaze lingering on Victoria's skin color in a way that made the air feel thick with unspoken assumptions. Don't you dare lie to me, Linda hissed. Tyler told me exactly what happened. Your daughter and her little friend ganged up on him and forced him off the swing. That's bullying, and I won't stand for it. Emma pressed closer to her mother, confused by the angry woman's accusations. Mom, I just asked for a turn on the swing. Tyler wasn't using it anymore. Linda's attention snapped at Emma with startling intensity. Don't you talk to me, young lady. You stay quiet while the adults are talking. The sharp tone directed at her 8-year-old daughter triggered something protective and fierce in Victoria. Her professional composure held, but steel entered her voice. Mrs. Morrison, please don't speak to my daughter that way. The children had a minor disagreement about playground equipment, which they resolved peacefully. There's no issue here that requires adult intervention. Linda stepped closer, invading Victoria's personal space. Oh, there's definitely an issue here. The issue is that some parents think their kids can do whatever they want without consequences. Well, I'm here to tell you that's not how this works. Other parents scattered around the playground had begun to notice the confrontation. A few moved closer, sensing that the situation was escalating beyond normal playground politics. Sarah Chen, Lily's mother, positioned herself where she could intervene if necessary while pulling out her phone. Victoria took a small step back, maintaining space between herself and Linda while keeping Emma close. Mrs. Morrison, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Why don't we sit down and talk through what actually happened? I'm sure we can resolve this calmly. Linda's laugh was harsh and bitter. Resolve this calmly? Lady, you have no idea who you're dealing with. My family has lived in this town for 3 generations. My father was on the city council, my brother works for the police department, and I know exactly what kind of people try to push their way into our community and think they can do whatever they want. The racist undertone in Linda's words was unmistakable. Victoria felt her chest tighten, but her years of experience dealing with difficult parents in diverse educational settings had taught her to remain professional even in the face of bigotry. Mrs. Morrison, my family has been part of this community for 3 years. My daughter attends school here, I teach here, and we contribute to this neighborhood just like any other family. This conversation isn't about community membership, it's about children sharing playground equipment. Linda's face flushed darker. You teach here? That explains everything. You probably tell all these kids that they can walk all over children from good families. Well, let me tell you something about good families versus whatever this is. The insult hung in the air like poison. Several parents who had been watching from a distance began moving closer, their faces showing growing concern about Linda's increasingly aggressive behavior. Emma tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mom, can we just go home?" Victoria nodded, recognizing that the situation had moved far beyond anything productive. "You're absolutely right, sweetheart. We're leaving now." She began to guide Emma toward the parking lot, but Linda stepped straight into their path. "Oh no, you don't get to walk away from me. Not until we settle this. My son was humiliated today because of your daughter, and you're going to acknowledge that and apologize." Victoria stopped walking, but maintained her calm demeanor. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm not going to apologize for something that didn't happen. The children had a disagreement, they worked it out, and now we're going home. Please step aside." Linda's voice rose to a shout that carried across the entire playground. "You are arrogant. You think you're better than everyone else, don't you? Moving into our neighborhood, taking jobs from our teachers, raising your kids to think they can disrespect our children? Well, I've had enough of people like you." The explicitly racist nature of Linda's rant shocked even Tyler, who began tugging on his mother's sleeve. "Mom, maybe we should just go." Linda shook him off roughly. "No, Tyler, you need to see this. You need to see what happens when people think they can disrespect our family." Victoria's patience finally reached its breaking point. Her voice remained controlled, but determination hardened her words. "Mrs. Morrison, you need to stop this right now. You're making a scene in front of children, including your own son. This behavior is inappropriate and frankly embarrassing." The word embarrassing hit Linda like a slap. Her face contorted with rage, and she took another aggressive step forward. "Embarrassing? You want to see embarrassed? I'll show you embarrassing things. Nobody talks to me that way, especially not some affirmative action teacher who thinks she can lecture me about appropriate behavior." Sarah Chen, who had been recording the confrontation on her phone, spoke up from several yards away. "Mrs. Morrison, you need to calm down. You're being recorded, and this is completely inappropriate." Linda whirled towards Sarah. "You shut your mouth and mind your own business. This doesn't concern you people." The phrase "you people" sent a chill through everyone within earshot. What had started as a playground dispute had devolved into an openly racist confrontation that was being witnessed by children and parents throughout the area. Victoria made a decision. She pulled out her own phone and began dialing. "I'm calling the school administration and asking them to intervene. This has gone too far." Linda's fury reached a breaking point. "You're calling who? Nobody calls anyone on me. Nobody." She lunged forward and grabbed for Victoria's phone, trying to snatch it from her hands. Victoria instinctively pulled back, protecting both her phone and her daughter. "Mrs. Morrison, don't touch me. Step back right now." But Linda was beyond reason. The divorce stress, the work pressure, and the racist resentment she had been nursing for months had combined into a toxic cocktail that demanded release. When Victoria continued to pull away from her reaching hands, Linda raised her voice to a shriek. "I said, give me that phone. You don't get to call anyone. You don't get to cause problems for my family." Victoria held the phone higher, out of Linda's reach. "I'm calling Principal Williams. This behavior is unacceptable and it needs to stop."
Linda's face twisted with fury. "Fine. If you want to make this a big deal, then let's make it a big deal. You picked the wrong family to mess with, lady. My brother is a police officer, and he knows how to handle troublemakers like you." The threat was explicit and chilling. Victoria realized that Linda was prepared to weaponize law enforcement against her family over a playground disagreement that had been resolved by the children themselves. Emma, who had been watching the adult confrontation with growing confusion and fear, began to cry. The sight of her daughter's tears while being threatened by a stranger triggered every protective instinct Victoria possessed. "Mrs. Morrison, you need to leave us alone right now. You're frightening the children, including your own son. This conversation is over." Victoria began walking around Linda toward the parking lot, Emma's hand clutched tightly in hers. But Linda wasn't finished. She pulled out her own phone and began dialing a number she knew by heart. "Danny, it's Linda.
I need you to get down to Roosevelt Elementary right now. There's a situation with some woman who's been harassing Tyler and threatening me. She's being aggressive, and I think she might be dangerous." Victoria stopped walking and turned around. "Mrs. Morrison, that's not true, and you know it. Don't lie to the police." Linda covered the phone's mouthpiece and smiled with malicious satisfaction. "Lady, you have no idea what you just got yourself into. My brother takes family protection very seriously, and he doesn't like it when outsiders cause problems in his town." She returned to her phone call. "Danny, she's still here causing trouble. She won't leave the school grounds, and she's getting more agitated. I'm scared for the children's safety. You need to get here fast." Victoria felt a chill of dread. She recognized the setup that was unfolding. Linda was crafting a narrative that would portray Victoria as the aggressor, setting the stage for a police response that could escalate far beyond anything the situation warranted. Sarah Chen approached cautiously, her phone still recording. "Mrs. Kane, I've got everything on video. Mrs. Morrison was the one being aggressive. You've been trying to de-escalate this whole time." Linda spun toward Sarah with renewed fury. "Turn that camera off right now! You have no right to record my family." Sarah held her ground. "I have every right to record in a public place, especially when someone is being threatened." Other parents had formed a loose circle around the confrontation, most of them clearly supporting Victoria and disturbed by Linda's behavior. Their presence seemed to further enrage Linda, who appeared to interpret their attention as judgment of her actions. "All of you need to mind your own business," Linda shouted. "This is between me and her, and none of you know what really happened here." Victoria made one final attempt at de-escalation. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm going to take my daughter home now. I suggest you do the same with Tyler. When you've had time to calm down, maybe we can have a rational conversation about playground etiquette." But as Victoria began walking toward her car, the sound of approaching sirens cut through the afternoon air. Linda's call to her brother had been successful, and the Fairhaven police were responding to a call about an aggressive woman threatening children at Roosevelt Elementary. Victoria's heart sank as she realized that what should have been a simple walk to the car was about to become something much more serious. Emma looked up at her with confused, frightened eyes. "Mom, why are the police coming?" Victoria kneeled down and held her daughter close. "I don't know, sweetheart, but whatever happens, remember that we didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes grown-ups make bad decisions, but the truth always comes out eventually." As the police cruiser pulled into the school parking lot, Victoria stood up and prepared to face whatever came next. She had no way of knowing that the officer stepping out of that car carried his own prejudices and anger, and that the confrontation was about to escalate into violence that would change everything. The stage was set for a collision between truth and power, and Victoria Kane was about to discover just how dangerous it could be to stand up for herself in a world where some people believed that the color of her skin made her automatically guilty of whatever they chose to accuse her of. Officer Danny Morrison emerged from his patrol car with the swagger of a man who had never questioned his own authority. At 42, he carried an extra 40 pounds around his midsection and the kind of permanent scowl that suggested he viewed every interaction as a potential threat to his dominance. His uniform was tight across his chest, his badge polished to a mirror shine, and his hand rested casually on his service weapon as he surveyed the scene at Roosevelt Elementary. Danny had been with the Fairhaven Police Department for 18 years, long enough to develop a reputation among his colleagues as someone who didn't hesitate to use force when he deemed it necessary. His personnel file contained 3 excessive force complaints that had been dismissed by the department's Internal Affairs Division, 2 commendations for bravery during domestic violence calls, and a pattern of citizen complaints that his supervisors attributed to the challenging nature of police work rather than any personal failings. What his personnel file didn't reflect was the resentment that had been building in Danny Morrison for years. The resentment toward federal diversity initiatives that he believed were taking jobs away from qualified white officers. The resentment toward community activists who questioned police methods. The resentment toward people he viewed as outsiders who moved into Fairhaven and then complained about how things had always been done. Danny's relationship with his sister Linda was complicated by shared grievances and mutual reinforcement of their prejudices. They had grown up in Fairhaven when it was a predominantly white community, and they both felt that the demographic changes of recent years represented a personal threat to their family's status and security. As Danny approached the group gathered near the playground, his eyes immediately focused on Victoria Kane. Something about her calm composure irritated him instinctively. In his experience, people who remained composed when police arrived usually were hiding something or believed they were above the law. Linda rushed toward her brother, tears streaming down her face in a performance that would have impressed drama teachers. "Danny, thank God you're here. This woman has been harassing Tyler and threatening me. She won't leave us alone." Victoria maintained her position near Emma, one protective arm around her daughter's shoulders. She could see the family resemblance between Linda and the approaching officer, and the realization that this was her brother sent a chill of apprehension through her. "Officer Morrison, I'm Victoria Kane. There seems to have been a misunderstanding about a playground incident between our children. I'd be happy to explain what actually happened." Danny's eyes narrowed as he took in Victoria's professional demeanor and articulate speech. Everything about her presence seemed to challenge his preconceptions about who belonged in his community and who had the right to speak to him as an equal. "Ma'am, I'll ask the questions here. You just answer them, and keep your hands where I can see them." The command was unnecessary and designed to establish dominance rather than ensure safety. Victoria's hands were clearly visible, holding Emma's hand and her phone, but she complied, raising her free hand slightly.
"Officer, I understand you need to gather information about what happened. Mrs. Morrison and I had a disagreement about playground etiquette involving our children. The situation escalated when she began making inappropriate comments and threatening to call police. I was attempting to leave when you arrived." Danny glanced at the gathering crowd of parents, most of whom were clearly sympathetic to Victoria. Their supportive presence seemed to further irritate him. Linda, wiping manufactured tears from her eyes, launched into her rehearsed version of events. "Danny, she started yelling at Tyler for no reason. Then when I tried to talk to her about it, she got aggressive and started threatening me. She said she was going to make trouble for our family. I was scared for Tyler's safety." Sarah Chen, still recording on her phone, spoke up from the crowd. "Officer, that's not what happened. I have the entire interaction on video. Mrs. Morrison was the aggressor throughout this confrontation." Danny's attention snapped to Sarah with obvious annoyance. "Ma'am, I need you to put that phone away and step back. This is a police investigation." Sarah held her ground. "I have the right to record at a public place, especially when documenting potential civil rights violations." The phrase civil rights violations hit Danny like a personal insult. In his worldview, accusations of civil rights violations were weapons used by troublemakers to attack good police officers who were just trying to do their jobs. "Lady, you need to stop interfering with police business right now, or you're going to find yourself under arrest for obstruction." The threat sent a murmur of concern through the gathered parents. Several of them began pulling out their own phones, recognizing that the situation was taking a dangerous turn. Victoria attempted to redirect the conversation toward resolution. "Officer Morrison, I think if we all just take a step back and discuss this calmly, we can clear up any misunderstandings. The children are getting scared, and this doesn't need to escalate further." Danny stepped closer to Victoria, using his size and position to intimidate her. "Lady, you don't tell me how to do my job, and from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been causing problems for a family that's been part of this community a lot longer than you have." The coded language wasn't lost on anyone present. Danny was making it clear that Victoria he viewed as an outsider, whose presence in Fairhaven was inherently suspicious. Emma pressed closer to her mother, frightened by the angry police officer who was speaking to her mother in a tone she had never heard adults use before. "Mom, I want to go home." Victoria squeezed her daughter's hand reassuringly while maintaining eye contact with Danny. "Officer, my daughter is scared. Would it be possible for her to wait in the car while we finish this discussion?" Danny's response was swift and harsh. "Nobody's going anywhere until I say so. And your daughter can learn right now what happens when people don't respect law enforcement."
The cruelty of involving an 8-year-old child in his power play shocked even some of Danny's natural allies in the crowd. But Victoria's protective instincts overrode her desire to avoid confrontation. "Officer Morrison, my daughter has nothing to do with this disagreement. She's a child, and using her to make some kind of point about respect is inappropriate and unprofessional." The word unprofessional struck Danny like a physical blow. In his mind, Victoria had just committed an unforgivable offense by publicly questioning his conduct in front of witnesses. "You want to see unprofessional?" Danny snarled, his hand moving to his handcuffs. "You just earned yourself a trip downtown for interfering with a police investigation and disrespecting a law enforcement officer." The threat sent a murmur of concern through the gathered parents. Several of them began pulling out their own phones, recognizing that the situation was taking a dangerous turn. Dr. Peterson, a respected pediatrician whose son attended Roosevelt Elementary, stepped forward from the crowd. "Officer, I've been watching this entire interaction. Mrs. Kane has been completely professional and cooperative. She's done nothing that warrants arrest." Danny spun toward Dr. Peterson with fury. "Sir, you need to step back and let me handle police business, unless you want to join her downtown." The threat against a prominent community member revealed the extent to which Danny had lost control of his emotions and judgment. But he was too deep into his power trip to recognize the damage he was inflicting on his own credibility. Victoria realized that reasoning with Danny was impossible, but she made one final attempt to protect her daughter from the trauma that was unfolding. "Officer Morrison, if you feel you need to arrest me, I understand. But please allow my daughter to go with Mrs. Chen until this is resolved. She doesn't need to witness this." Danny's response revealed the depths of his cruelty. "Your daughter can watch and learn what happens when people like you try to cause trouble in my town. Maybe it'll teach her some respect." The moment crystallized everything that was wrong with Danny Morrison's approach to law enforcement. He had transformed a minor playground disagreement into a lesson in racial intimidation, using his badge to terrorize a child in service of his personal prejudices. "Officer Morrison, you are traumatizing an 8-year-old child for no legitimate law enforcement purpose. This is abuse of power, and I will be filing a complaint with your department." The threat of accountability was the final straw for Danny Morrison. In his mind, Victoria had moved from being a problem to being an enemy who needed to be neutralized decisively. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back," he commanded, reaching for his handcuffs with one hand, while positioning himself to use force if necessary. Victoria looked down at Emma, whose tears were flowing freely as she watched her mother being treated like a criminal. The sight of her daughter's terror strengthened her resolve to maintain her dignity in the face of injustice. "Emma, sweetheart, Mommy hasn't done anything wrong. Remember that no matter what happens next. Sometimes bad people do bad things, but the truth always comes out eventually." The words carried a quiet prophecy that Danny Morrison was too blinded by rage to recognize. As he roughly grabbed Victoria's arm to force her into position for handcuffing, the woman he was about to assault was married to one of the most powerful military officers in the United States. Sarah Chen continued recording as other parents documented the arrest from multiple angles. Their phones captured every word, every gesture, every moment of unnecessary force that Danny employed in his determination to assert dominance over a woman whose only crime had been standing up for herself and her child. The stage was set for the physical confrontation that would transform a playground disagreement into a federal case, and Danny Morrison was about to learn that some people possessed the power to hold him accountable for his actions, no matter how untouchable he believed himself to be. As Victoria was forced to turn around, Emma's cries echoing across the playground, the community of Fairhaven was about to witness an act of violence that would expose the rot at the heart of their police department and trigger a reckoning that would reach the highest levels of military and federal law enforcement. The handcuffs clicked shut around Victoria's wrists with a sound that seemed to echo across the Roosevelt Elementary playground. Officer Danny Morrison had positioned them deliberately tight enough to restrict circulation and cause discomfort without leaving obvious marks. It was a technique he had perfected over years of arrests, a way to inflict pain while maintaining plausible deniability. Emma's sobs grew louder as she watched her mother being restrained like a criminal. The 8-year-old's world was collapsing around her as the fundamental assumptions of safety and justice that her parents had taught her crumbled in real time. "Mommy didn't do anything wrong," Emma cried, reaching toward Victoria with desperate little hands. "Why are you hurting her?" Danny Morrison looked down at the child with cold satisfaction. "Kid, your mommy should have thought about you before she decided to mouth off to a police officer. Maybe next time she'll show some respect." The cruelty of using an 8-year-old's tears to make a point about adult authority shocked even Linda Morrison, who had begun to realize that her brother's response was escalating far beyond what she had intended. She had wanted Victoria to be embarrassed and put in her place, not brutalized in front of children. "Danny," Linda said hesitantly, "maybe that's enough. You've made your point. Tyler's not even upset anymore." Danny spun toward his sister with irritation. "Linda, I'm handling this. When someone disrespects law enforcement, there have to be consequences. Otherwise, every troublemaker in town thinks they can get away with whatever they want." Dr. Peterson stepped forward again, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard in the community. "Officer Morrison, this has gone far enough. Mrs. Kane has committed no crime, and you're traumatizing children with this unnecessary display of force." Danny's hand moved to his baton as he faced Dr. Peterson. "Doctor, you're interfering with a lawful arrest. Take one more step, and you'll be joining her." The threat against a respected pediatrician who had served Fairhaven for 20 years revealed the extent to which Danny had lost touch with reality. But his rage and need to dominate had overtaken any remaining judgment. Sarah Chen continued recording, her phone capturing every word and gesture. "Mrs. Kane," she called out, "we're documenting everything. The truth will come out." Victoria managed a slight nod despite the pain in her shoulders from the too tight handcuffs. Her voice remained steady as she addressed her daughter. "Emma, honey, go to Mrs. Chen. Stay with her until this is over." But Emma was too frightened to leave her mother's side. She clung to Victoria's leg, sobbing uncontrollably as she tried to understand why the police officer was hurting the person she loved most in the world. Danny's irritation at the child's distress revealed another layer of his character. Instead of recognizing Emma's terror as evidence that his actions were inappropriate, he viewed her emotional reaction as another challenge to his authority. "Kid, you need to get away from the suspect right now, or I'll have to move you myself." The threat to physically remove an 8-year-old from her mother sent waves of horror through the gathering crowd. Parents began moving closer, their protective instincts overriding their fear of police retaliation. "Officer Morrison, you cannot threaten to put your hands on that child," shouted Marcus Williams, a local attorney who had been picking up his son when the confrontation began. "What you're doing here is completely outside the bounds of lawful police conduct." Danny's face flushed darker as another community member challenged his actions. The growing opposition from respected members of Fairhaven society should have given him pause, but his ego demanded that he escalate rather than retreat. "Sir, you're under arrest for interfering with police business," Danny announced, reaching for a second set of handcuffs. The attempted arrest of Marcus Williams finally galvanized the crowd into action. Parents stepped forward en masse, creating a human barrier between Danny and the attorney. Their phones were out, recording from every angle, capturing the moment when a single police officer declared war on an entire community. "This is insane," called out Janet Foster, the school's PTA president. "Officer Morrison, you're arresting people for asking questions and protecting children. This isn't law enforcement, this is tyranny." Danny found himself surrounded by hostile faces, all of them documenting his actions, all of them bearing witness to his abuse of power. The situation had spiraled completely beyond his control, but his pride would not allow him to back down. "All of you need to disperse immediately," he shouted, his hand now resting on his service weapon. "This is a lawful arrest, and anyone who interferes will be taken into custody." The threat to draw his weapon on a crowd of parents and children represented a complete breakdown of professional judgment. Even Linda Morrison stepped back in alarm, finally understanding that her brother had crossed lines that could not be uncrossed. Victoria, still handcuffed and struggling to comfort Emma while restrained, recognized that the situation was about to become deadly. Her teacher instincts kicked in as she tried to protect the children around her from witnessing something that would traumatize them permanently. "Officer Morrison," Victoria said quietly, her voice cutting through the chaos with surprising clarity. "Whatever you think I've done, these children don't deserve to see violence. Please let me walk to your car peacefully so we can resolve this away from them." The offer to cooperate should have provided Danny a face-saving exit from the confrontation he had created. Instead, her continued composure and dignity enraged him further. In his twisted perspective, Victoria's refusal to break down and beg for mercy was itself an act of defiance that demanded punishment. "You don't get to tell me how to handle my business," he snarled, grabbing Victoria's arm roughly and beginning to march her toward his patrol car. "And you're going to learn what happens when people like you think they can challenge people like me." The journey across the playground became a perp walk designed to humiliate Victoria in front of the entire community. Danny deliberately took the longest route possible, forcing Victoria to stumble over uneven ground while handcuffed, ensuring that her degradation was as public as possible. Emma followed behind them, crying and calling for her mother, while the crowd of parents documented every step of the shameful procession. The sight of a respected teacher and community member being treated like a dangerous criminal over a playground dispute became seared into the memory of everyone present. When they reached the patrol car, Danny opened the rear door with unnecessary force, the metal hinges groaning in protest. He placed his hand on top of Victoria's head, ostensibly to protect her from hitting the doorframe, but applied downward pressure that was clearly meant to cause discomfort and further humiliation. "Get in," he commanded, pushing Victoria toward the back seat. But as Victoria began to comply, Emma broke free from the crowd and ran toward the patrol car, her small hands reaching for her mother through the window. The sight of her terrified daughter's face pressed against the glass triggered something fierce and protective in Victoria. "Danny, I need a moment to reassure my daughter. She's 8 years old and she's terrified. Please." The request was reasonable, maternal, and completely human. Any officer with an ounce of decency would have granted it without hesitation, but Danny Morrison saw it as another attempt to undermine his authority.
Your daughter will learn to deal with it, just like you're about to learn to deal with the consequences of your actions. He slammed the car door shut, separating Victoria from Emma with a barrier of steel and glass that might as well have been a prison wall. Emma's cries became muffled, but no less heartbreaking, as she pressed her face against the window, trying to reach her mother. The crowd of parents watched in horror as an 8-year-old girl was traumatized by a police officer who seemed to take pleasure in her suffering. Sarah Chen knelt down and gently pulled Emma away from the car, wrapping the sobbing child in her arms while continuing to record the aftermath of Danny's brutality. Inside the patrol car, Victoria sat in the suffocating heat, her hands still cuffed behind her back, watching through the window as her daughter collapsed in grief. The sight of Emma's breakdown was more painful than any physical abuse Danny could have inflicted. But the ordeal was far from over. As Danny walked around to the driver's side of the patrol car, his radio crackled with a transmission from dispatch. "Unit 23, be advised we have multiple calls reporting excessive force at Roosevelt Elementary. Supervisor is en route to your location." The news that his actions were being reported to supervisors should have given Danny pause. Instead, it triggered another wave of rage. In his mind, the community members who were documenting his conduct were not concerned citizens protecting civil rights. They were enemies who were trying to destroy his career. Danny turned back toward the crowd, his face contorted with fury. "All of you with phones need to stop recording right now. You're interfering with official police business, and I will arrest every single one of you if necessary." The threat was empty, and everyone knew it. Danny lacked the authority to arrest an entire crowd of parents for exercising their constitutional rights. But the desperation in his voice revealed how completely he had lost control of the situation. Dr. Peterson, who had been quietly observing the escalation,
stepped forward with the calm authority of someone accustomed to dealing with crisis situations. "Officer Morrison, I'm going to ask you one more time to reconsider your actions. Mrs. Kane has committed no crime. You've traumatized a child, and you've threatened multiple community members. End this now before you destroy your career and this community's trust in law enforcement." The words were prophetic, but Danny Morrison was beyond hearing wisdom. He had crossed too many lines to retreat, burned too many bridges to find his way back to sanity. The reckoning that was building around him would soon arrive with the force of a hurricane. But in that moment, he was still convinced that his badge made him untouchable. As he climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine, Danny Morrison believed he was driving away victorious, having taught an uppity outsider a lesson about respect and authority. He had no idea that the woman in his back seat was married to one of the most powerful men in the United States military, or that his actions had been recorded and documented by dozens of witnesses who would soon ensure that justice was served. The patrol car pulled away from Roosevelt Elementary, carrying Victoria toward a jail cell, while leaving behind a community that had witnessed something that would change Fairhaven forever. Emma's cries echoed across the playground as her mother disappeared from view. But the reckoning that would restore justice was already beginning to build momentum in ways that Danny Morrison could never have imagined. The Fairhaven Police Department's holding cell smelled of stale coffee and industrial disinfectant. Victoria Kane sat on the narrow metal bench, her wrists still bearing red marks from the too tight handcuffs that had finally been removed during processing. Her teacher's composure remained intact despite the humiliation of being fingerprinted, photographed, and searched like a common criminal. The booking process had been deliberately degrading. Officer Morrison had made sure that every step took longer than necessary, every procedure was performed with maximum discomfort, and every interaction reinforced his belief that Victoria needed to be taught a lesson about challenging authority. But through it all, Victoria had maintained her dignity, answering questions with professional clarity and refusing to give Danny the satisfaction of seeing her break. Now, alone in the cell, Victoria finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had happened. Her daughter had been traumatized, her reputation potentially damaged, and her family thrust into a nightmare that had begun with nothing more than a playground dispute over swing usage. But underneath her exhaustion and grief, something else was building. Not anger, not desperation, but a cold determination to ensure that what happened to her would never happen to another family. Victoria pulled the single phone call she had been granted like a card she had hoped never to play. The number she dialed connected to a secure military communications center halfway around the world, where advanced encryption systems protected conversations between the Pentagon and deployed commanders. The phone rang twice before a crisp voice answered. "Pacific Fleet Communications, this is Lieutenant Commander Harris." "This is Victoria Kane, Admiral Kane's wife. I need to speak with my husband immediately. It's an emergency." There was a brief pause as the communications officer processed the gravity of an admiral's wife calling the command center directly. "Ma'am, I'm going to interrupt the admiral's briefing immediately. Please hold the line." Within 60 seconds, a familiar voice came through the encrypted connection. "Victoria, what's happened? Are you hurt?" Admiral Robert Kane's voice carried the calm authority that had made him one of the Navy's most respected commanders.
but Victoria could hear the underlying concern that came from 20 years of marriage and genuine love. "Robert, I'm physically fine, but I need you to come home. I've been arrested for trying to help an elderly neighbor who had fallen." The situation escalated when a racist parent called her brother, who happens to be a police officer. He arrested me in front of Emma, traumatized her, and abused his authority in ways that need to be addressed at the highest levels. Admiral Kane's mind immediately shifted into operational mode, the same systematic thinking that had made him successful in managing complex naval operations. "Victoria, I need you to listen carefully. Say nothing more to anyone until I arrive. Don't sign anything, don't agree to anything, and don't try to explain the situation to anyone in that facility. I am activating emergency leave and will be there within 12 hours. "Robert," Victoria said quietly. "They hurt Emma. She watched them handcuff me and take me away. That little girl will remember this for the rest of her life." The Admiral's voice took on an edge that would have been familiar to any sailor who had served under his command. "Victoria, I promise you that everyone responsible for what happened today will be held accountable. This isn't just about us. This is about whether local law enforcement can terrorize military families with impunity." After ending the call, Admiral Kane immediately contacted his chief of staff. "Captain Williams, I need emergency transport to Connecticut, and I need the JAG Corps to begin preparing a federal civil rights case. My wife has been arrested under circumstances that appear to constitute a clear violation of her constitutional rights." Captain Williams had served with Admiral Kane for 5 years and had never heard that particular tone in his commander's voice. "Sir, I'll have a transport ready within 2 hours and legal counsel standing by. What level of priority should I assign to this matter?"
Captain, treat this as a direct threat to military readiness. When local law enforcement can arrest the family members of deployed service members without cause, it undermines the morale and effectiveness of our entire command structure. This gets our highest priority. Meanwhile, back in Fairhaven, the videos of Victoria's arrest had begun spreading across social media platforms with viral intensity. Sarah Chen's footage of the confrontation, arrest, and Emma's traumatic breakdown was being shared thousands of times per hour, accompanied by commentary that grew more outraged with each viewing. The hashtag #JusticeForVictoria began trending locally, then regionally, then nationally, as the story caught the attention of civil rights organizations, military family support groups, and social justice advocates across the country. At Fairhaven Community Hospital, where Victoria had worked for years, Dr. Patricia Gomez called an emergency staff meeting. The arrest of one of their most respected nurses had sent shockwaves through the medical community, and Dr. Gomez wanted to ensure that the hospital's response was swift and unequivocal. "Victoria Kane represents the best of what we strive to be as healthcare professionals," Dr. Gomez told the assembled staff. "She was arrested for doing exactly what we train our people to do, providing medical assistance to someone in need. This hospital will support her completely, and we will use every resource at our disposal to ensure that justice is served." The hospital's public affairs director was already drafting press statements and coordinating with legal counsel to support Victoria's case. Within hours, Fairhaven Community Hospital would become the first major institution to publicly condemn Victoria's arrest and demand accountability from the police department. At Roosevelt Elementary, Principal Janet Morrison, no relation to Officer Danny Morrison, despite the shared surname, faced a crisis unlike anything in her 25-year career in education. Parents were calling, demanding answers, school board members were asking for emergency meetings, and the media was requesting statements about the arrest of one of the school's most beloved teachers. Principal Morrison called Superintendent David Chen to report the situation and request guidance. Dr. Chen's response was immediate and decisive. "Janet, Victoria Kane is a model educator who was providing emergency medical assistance when this happened. The school district will support her completely and will be calling for a full investigation into the police department's conduct. By evening, 3 major news networks had picked up the story. The combination of a teacher arrested while helping an injured person, an 8-year-old traumatized by police brutality, and clear evidence of racial bias created exactly the kind of narrative that captured national attention. Officer Danny Morrison, meanwhile, had spent the afternoon basking in what he believed was a successful assertion of authority. He filed his report, painting Victoria as an aggressive troublemaker who had threatened his sister and resisted lawful arrest. In his version of events, he was a hero who had protected the community from a dangerous individual. Danny's satisfaction began to erode when his supervisor, Captain Frank Rodriguez, called him into an emergency meeting at the end of his shift. Captain Rodriguez had been fielding phone calls all afternoon from community leaders, hospital administrators, school officials, and increasingly reporters from major news outlets. "Morrison," Captain Rodriguez grimly said, "we need to talk about what happened at Roosevelt Elementary today. I've got the hospital calling for your badge, the school district demanding an investigation, and half the town saying you traumatized an 8-year-old for no reason." Danny's defenses immediately went up. "Captain, I handle a situation where a suspect was interfering with police business and showing disrespect for law enforcement. Everything I did was by the book." But Captain Rodriguez pulled up the videos that had been sent to the department by concerned citizens. "Morrison, I've watched the footage, I've read the witness statements, and I've got to tell you, this doesn't look good. You arrested a woman for trying to help an injured person, and you did it in front of her child. She was being uncooperative and argumentative," Danny insisted. "She refused to follow lawful orders and showed a complete lack of respect for police authority." But Captain Rodriguez had been in law enforcement long enough to recognize excessive force when he saw it. "Morrison, effective immediately, you're on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Turn in your badge and weapon." The words hit Danny like a physical blow. Administrative leave meant his actions were being taken seriously, that his version of events wasn't being accepted without question. For the first time since the arrest, doubt began to creep into his certainty. "Captain, this is ridiculous. I was doing my job. That woman was causing problems and needed to be arrested." "Morrison," Captain Rodriguez said wearily, "you arrested a teacher for helping an injured person. You traumatized an 8-year-old child, and you did it all while being recorded by dozens of witnesses. This isn't going away quietly." As Danny Morrison left the police station that evening, stripped of his badge and weapon, he still had no idea that the woman he had arrested was married to one of the most powerful military officers in the United States. He had no idea that Admiral Robert Kane was already en route from the Persian Gulf with a team of military lawyers and federal investigators. Most importantly, Danny Morrison had no idea that his actions had triggered a federal investigation that would expose corruption and abuse throughout the Fairhaven Police Department, ending careers and transforming law enforcement practices across the entire region. The reckoning was coming, carried by a man who commanded nuclear submarines and reported directly to the Secretary of Defense. And when Admiral Kane arrived in Fairhaven, he would bring with him the full weight of federal authority and military precision applied to the pursuit of justice for his family and his community. Danny Morrison had arrested a teacher. He was about to face the consequences of attacking the family of one of America's most powerful military commanders. Admiral Robert Kane's military transport touched down at Bradley International Airport at 0630 hours Eastern Standard Time, exactly 11 hours and 43 minutes after receiving Victoria's call from the Fairhaven jail cell. The C-37B executive transport had carried him across 3 time zones and 2 continents, but the Admiral emerged from the aircraft looking composed and alert as if he had spent the night in his own bed, rather than crossing the Pacific Ocean. Accompanying Admiral Kane were Captain Sarah Mitchell from the Navy's Judge Advocate General Corps,
Lieutenant Colonel James Washington from the Department of Defense Inspector General's Office, and Agent Rebecca Foster from the FBI's Civil Rights Division. The presence of federal investigators on a military transport sent an unmistakable message about how seriously the Pentagon was treating Victoria's arrest. Admiral Kane's first stop was not the police station, but the hospital where Victoria had been taken after being released on her own recognizance just 2 hours earlier. Admiral Kane's staff had arranged for her release through federal channels, bypassing the local court system entirely and making it clear that this case now had national security implications. Victoria was sitting in the emergency room, having her wrists examined for nerve damage from the handcuffs, when she heard the familiar sound of military dress shoes clicking across the linoleum floor. She looked up to see her husband striding through the hospital corridor with the bearing of a man accustomed to commanding aircraft carriers and nuclear submarines. "Robert," she said softly, standing to embrace the man who had traveled halfway around the world to be at her side. Admiral Kane held her wife carefully, mindful of her injuries, but needing to feel for himself that she was safe. His voice, when he spoke, carried the controlled fury of someone who had spent the flight planning systematic retribution. "Victoria, are you all right? Has Emma been examined by a psychologist?"
She's with Sarah Chen, being cared for by people who love her. But Robert, what they did to her, watching her mother arrested for helping someone, that's going to stay with her forever." The Admiral's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "Not forever. Emma is going to see justice served. She's going to understand that what happened was wrong and that people who abuse their power face consequences." Captain Mitchell stepped forward, her briefcase containing legal documents that would transform the situation from a local incident into a federal case. "Mrs. Kane, I'm Captain Mitchell from the JAG Corps. We're going to need a detailed statement about everything that occurred, but first, I want you to know that the Navy considers this attack on you to be an attack on the entire military family structure." Meanwhile, at Fairhaven Police Headquarters, Chief Robert Martinez was experiencing the worst day of his 30-year law enforcement career. The phone calls had started at 0500 and hadn't stopped. The FBI field office in New Haven demanded immediate access to all records related to Victoria Kane's arrest. The Connecticut State Police announced a concurrent investigation into civil rights violations. The Department of Defense Inspector General requested personnel files for Officer Morrison and his supervisors. But the call that truly terrified Chief Martinez came at 0645, just 15 minutes after Admiral Kane's transport had landed. The voice on the other end identified itself as belonging to Assistant Secretary of Defense Patricia Williams, calling on behalf of the Secretary of Defense himself. "Chief Martinez," Assistant Secretary Williams said with the crisp authority of someone who controlled military budgets in the billions, "I'm calling to inform you that the arrest of Mrs. Victoria Kane is now a matter of national security concern. Admiral Kane commands critical naval assets in one of the world's most volatile regions. Any threat to his family's safety or well-being directly impacts military readiness and effectiveness." Chief Martinez felt his stomach drop. "Ma'am, I understand your concern, but this was a local law enforcement matter handled by one of my officers responding to a complaint." "Chief Martinez," the Assistant Secretary continued, "you're missing the point. When local police terrorize the families of deployed military personnel, it undermines trust in the institutions that our service members rely on for protection while they're defending the country. This is bigger than your officer, bigger than your department, and certainly bigger than your jurisdiction." The call ended with a directive that made Chief Martinez's blood run cold. Federal investigators would be taking over the case within the hour. All evidence, all reports, all records related to Officer Morrison and the Kane arrest were to be preserved and turned over to federal authorities. Any attempt to destroy or alter evidence would be treated as obstruction of justice and prosecuted to the fullest extent of federal law. At the Roosevelt Elementary playground, the site of Victoria's arrest had become an impromptu memorial and protest site. Parents had left flowers, handwritten notes of support, and signs reading "Justice for Victoria" and "Protect our teachers." The swing set where the initial disagreement had occurred was covered with rainbow ribbons tied by children who wanted to show support for their beloved Mrs. Kane. Principal Morrison stood at her office window, watching the growing crowd of community members who had come to show solidarity. The school district's crisis management team was working overtime to handle media requests, parent concerns, and the logistical challenges of supporting students who had witnessed their teacher being arrested. Dr. Chen, the superintendent, arrived at 0700 to personally oversee the district's response. His first priority was ensuring that Emma Kane received appropriate psychological support, but he was also acutely aware that the entire community was watching how the school system responded to an attack on one of their own. Officer Danny Morrison woke up that morning to find his front yard filled with reporters and news vans. The videos of Victoria's arrest had been featured on the morning news programs of all 3 major networks, and Danny's face was now recognizable to millions of Americans as the police officer who traumatized an 8-year-old girl while arresting her mother for helping an injured person. Danny's phone had been ringing constantly since 0600. But he was under strict orders from the police union not to speak to any media representatives. The union's legal counsel had reviewed the videos and witness statements and privately told Danny that his career in law enforcement was likely over. The first federal agents arrived at Fairhaven Police Headquarters at 0800 sharp. Agent Foster from the FBI's Civil Rights Division presented credentials and a federal warrant authorizing the seizure of all evidence related to Victoria Kane's arrest. Behind her, investigators from the Department of Defense Inspector General's office began the systematic documentation of what they already suspected was a pattern of civil rights violations extending far beyond a single incident.
Chief Martinez watched helplessly as federal agents took control of his facility. Agent Foster's authority superseded his own, and the presence of military investigators made it clear that this case had implications reaching to the highest levels of government. Agent Foster addressed the assembled Fairhaven police personnel with the authority of someone who had investigated civil rights violations across the country. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here to investigate potential federal crimes, including violation of civil rights under color of law, conspiracy to deprive constitutional rights, and intimidation of military family members. Anyone with information relevant to these charges is required to cooperate fully with this investigation. The scope of the federal investigation became clear when Agent Foster announced that they would be reviewing not just Victoria's arrest, but Officer Morrison's entire career, his training records, his previous use of force reports, and any complaints filed against him. They would also be examining the department's policies on de-escalation, cultural sensitivity training, and accountability measures. Captain Rodriguez, Danny Morrison's immediate supervisor, found himself in a conference room with federal investigators who wanted to know why he had approved Danny's version of events without conducting any independent investigation. The questions were precise, professional, and devastating in their implications. Captain Rodriguez, Lieutenant Colonel Washington asked. After reviewing Officer Morrison's personnel file, we note 3 previous excessive force complaints that were dismissed by Internal Affairs. Can you explain why those complaints weren't treated as warning signs of problematic behavior? Captain Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably. Those complaints were investigated and found to be unsubstantiated. Officer Morrison was cleared of wrongdoing in each case. Lieutenant Colonel Washington placed photographs on the table showing Victoria's wrist injuries from the handcuffs. Captain, how do you reconcile those previous clearances with the clear evidence of excessive force in this case? Do you believe your internal affairs process is adequate to identify problematic officers before they commit federal crimes? The questions revealed the systematic nature of the problems within the Fairhaven Police Department. This wasn't just about Danny Morrison's individual misconduct. It was about an institutional culture that had protected abusive officers and failed to hold them accountable for their actions. At Fairhaven Community Hospital, Admiral Kane was meeting with Dr. Gomez and the medical staff who had worked with Victoria for years. Their testimonials about her character and professionalism were being documented as part of the federal case. But the Admiral was also gathering information about the broader pattern of police misconduct in the community. Dr. Gomez shared concerns that had been building for months about aggressive police responses to medical emergencies, incidents where officers had interfered with emergency medical care, and a general deterioration in police-community relations that was affecting the hospital's ability to serve patients effectively. Admiral Kane listened with the systematic attention he brought to intelligence briefings about threats to national security. What he was hearing suggested that Victoria's arrest was not an isolated incident, but rather the culmination of a pattern of abuse that had been escalating unchecked.
By noon, the story had reached the Pentagon briefing room, where Press Secretary Colonel Jennifer Hayes was fielding questions about the military's response to the arrest of a flag officer's wife. The Pentagon's official statement was carefully worded but unmistakably firm in its condemnation of the Fairhaven Police Department's actions. The Department of Defense takes very seriously any threat to the welfare of military families, Colonel Hayes told the assembled reporters. When local law enforcement violates the civil rights of military family members, it directly impacts military readiness and effectiveness. We will pursue all available remedies to ensure that justice is served and that such incidents do not recur. The Pentagon's public involvement in the case sent shockwaves through law enforcement communities across the country. Police departments began reviewing their own policies and training programs, recognizing that the Fairhaven incident had created new federal scrutiny of local police interactions with military families. Back in Fairhaven, Danny Morrison received a call from his union representative, informing him that the union would not be providing legal support for federal civil rights charges. The evidence against him was too clear, the political implications too significant, and the union's resources too limited to defend what appeared to be an indefensible case. Danny Morrison was on his own, facing federal prosecution, civil lawsuits, and the complete destruction of the career he had spent 18 years building. The badge that had given him power and authority was gone, and the uniform that had commanded respect was now a symbol of abuse and corruption. The reckoning that Admiral Kane had promised was unfolding with military precision, and Danny Morrison was about to discover that attacking the family of one of America's most powerful military officers carried consequences that no local police union could protect him from. 6 months after Victoria Kane's arrest at Roosevelt Elementary, the landscape of law enforcement in Connecticut had fundamentally changed. The federal investigation, led by Agent Foster, had expanded far beyond the Fairhaven Police Department, uncovering a network of civil rights violations, excessive force incidents, and institutional racism that stretched across 3 counties. Officer Danny Morrison faced 15 federal charges, including violation of civil rights under color of law, conspiracy to deprive constitutional rights, and assault under federal statute. His trial, which became a national focus for civil rights advocates, resulted in a conviction on all counts and a sentence of 8 years in federal prison. The courtroom was packed with military families, teachers, and community members who had traveled from across the country to witness accountability being served. The Morrison case established new legal precedents for prosecuting police officers who target military families. Federal prosecutors successfully argued that attacks on service members' families constituted a threat to national security, opening new avenues for federal intervention in local police misconduct cases. Chief Martinez retired under pressure after the federal investigation revealed that he had systematically ignored complaints about Morrison and other problematic officers. His replacement, Chief Angelo Rodriguez, came from the FBI's Civil Rights Division and implemented sweeping reforms that became a model for police departments nationwide. The Fairhaven Police Department's transformation was comprehensive. Every officer underwent mandatory bias training, de-escalation certification, and cultural competency education. New policies required supervisors to investigate any complaint involving military families within 24 hours and report findings to federal liaisons. Captain Rodriguez, Morrison's former supervisor, was demoted and transferred after the investigation revealed his role in covering up previous misconduct. 3 other officers were terminated for their involvement in what federal investigators called a culture of impunity that had protected abusive officers for years. Victoria returned to teaching at Roosevelt Elementary, but her experience had transformed her into a powerful advocate for civil rights education. Working with Admiral Kane, she developed a curriculum that taught children about constitutional rights, peaceful resistance, and the importance of standing up to injustice. The Victoria Kane Civil Rights Education Program was adopted by school districts across the country. Emma Kane, despite her trauma, became an unlikely symbol of resilience. With support from military family counselors and community psychologists, she processed her experience and began speaking at age-appropriate forums about standing up to bullying and supporting friends who face injustice. Her story inspired other children who had witnessed police misconduct to speak up and seek help. Admiral Kane used his position to push for military-wide reforms protecting service members' families from local police and local police investigations. The ripple effects extended far beyond Fairhaven. Police departments across America began reviewing their policies regarding interactions with military families. Training academies incorporated the Morrison case into their curriculum as an example of how personal bias and abuse of authority could destroy careers and communities. Linda Morrison, whose initial complaint had triggered the entire incident, faced her own reckoning. Video evidence showed that she had fabricated much of her story about Victoria's behavior, leading to charges of filing a false police report and conspiracy to violate civil rights. Her conviction and 6-month jail sentence sent a clear message that civilians who weaponized police against innocent people would face consequences. The social media campaign that began with Sarah Chen's video evolved into a national movement called #ProtectOurTeachers, advocating for stronger protections for teachers who face harassment from parents or community members. The movement successfully pushed for legislation in 12 states, providing legal protections for teachers performing their professional duties. Roosevelt Elementary received a federal grant to establish the Community Healing Center, providing counseling services for families affected by police misconduct and training for educators on recognizing and addressing trauma in children. The center became a national model for community-based responses to institutional violence. Dr. Gomez at Fairhaven Community Hospital worked with Admiral Kane to establish protocols ensuring that medical professionals could provide emergency care without fear of police interference. The Kane Medical Emergency Protocol was adopted by hospitals nationwide. The federal investigation's findings led to congressional hearings on police accountability and military family protection. Senator Patricia Williams, chair of the Armed Services Committee, used the Kane case to push through the Military Family Protection Act, creating federal oversight of local police interactions with military families. The financial cost to Fairhaven was substantial. The city paid $2.3 million in settlements to the Kane family and an additional $800,000 in legal fees. Insurance premiums for municipal liability coverage increased dramatically, forcing budget reallocations that affected city services for years. But the human cost was measured differently. Children who witnessed Victoria's arrest received counseling to process their trauma. Parents who had remained silent during the confrontation grappled with their own complicity and committed to speaking up against injustice in the future. The playground where everything began was renamed the Victoria Kane Memorial Garden, featuring educational displays about civil rights, peaceful resistance, and community solidarity. School districts from around the region visited to learn about the importance of standing up for what is right, even when it's difficult. Victoria's story became part of military family orientation programs, teaching spouses about their rights and providing resources for dealing with discrimination or harassment. The Kane Family Support Network grew into a national organization providing legal assistance and advocacy for military families facing civil rights violations. Danny Morrison's imprisonment became a turning point for police accountability advocates. His case proved that officers could be held federally accountable for civil rights violations, encouraging other victims to come forward and seek justice through federal channels. The media coverage of the case sparked national conversations about implicit bias, police training, and the protection of vulnerable communities. Victoria's dignity throughout her ordeal became a powerful example of how to maintain moral authority in the face of institutional oppression.
Admiral Kane's military career continued to flourish, but he also became a powerful voice for civil rights within the military establishment. His advocacy helped establish new policies protecting not just military families, but all citizens from police misconduct through enhanced federal oversight and accountability measures. 5 years later, as Victoria stood before a national education conference sharing her story with teachers from across America, she reflected on how a simple act of helping an injured neighbor had transformed into a movement for justice and accountability. The playground dispute that began everything had been resolved in minutes by the children themselves. But the adult response to that innocent disagreement had revealed deep-seated problems that required years of systematic change to address. Victoria's refusal to accept injustice had created ripples that continued to spread, touching lives and changing institutions across the country. Emma Kane, now 13 and articulate beyond her years, often joined her mother at these speaking engagements. Her message was simple but powerful. Children deserve to live in a world where helping others is celebrated, where standing up for what's right is protected, and where those in power serve justice rather than their own prejudices. The story of Victoria Kane's arrest and the reckoning that followed became more than a cautionary tale about police misconduct. It became a blueprint for how individuals with courage, communities with conscience, and institutions with integrity could work together to create lasting change. In Fairhaven, the police department that once terrorized a teacher for helping her neighbor now operated under federal oversight, with policies and training that emphasized service, accountability, and respect for all community members. The transformation wasn't perfect, but it was profound and lasting. Victoria Kane never sought to become a symbol or a spokesperson. She simply refused to accept that helping an injured person should result in arrest, humiliation, and trauma for her family. That refusal, backed by her husband's authority and amplified by a community's courage, had changed not just her own life, but the lives of countless others who would benefit from the reforms, protections, and precedents established in her name. The legacy of that autumn afternoon at Roosevelt Elementary would endure for generations, a reminder that justice delayed is not always justice denied, and that sometimes the most powerful response to injustice is the quiet determination to ensure it never happens again.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.